My name is Audrey. I'm 31 years old, and 3 months ago, at my stepfather's retirement dinner, in front of 64 people, my mother stood up with a glass of Okanagan Riesling in her hand and told the entire room that the greatest thing I'd ever done for the family was finally stop asking them for money. She smiled when she said it. The way you smile when you've been waiting years to say something out loud. I didn't cry. I didn't get up. I sat at the far end of the table near the kitchen door, next to my stepfather's colleague from the insurance firm, who kept refilling his water glass. And I made a decision so quiet it didn't even feel like a decision. It felt like a door closing, but I need to take you back. Because this story doesn't begin at a restaurant in Vancouver. It starts in a suburb of Edmonton, Alberta, in a split-level house off Whitemud Drive, when I was 12 years old and my father sat on the edge of my bed and told me I was going to be fine. He was wrong, by the way, but he said it with such certainty that I believed him for years. My father's name was Robert Cheng. He ran a small accounting firm out of a strip mall on the south side of Edmonton. Nothing glamorous. 3 employees, a coffee maker that never quite worked right, and a client list built entirely on word of mouth from the Chinese-Canadian community he'd grown up in. He was steady. That was the word people used at his funeral. Steady. Like a piece of furniture you don't notice until it's gone and you keep reaching for it. He died when I was 14. Heart failure, sudden, November. The kind of loss that doesn't announce itself. It just arrives, and then everything you thought was solid turns out to have been sitting on top of him. My mother remarried 3 years later. His name was Gerald. Gerald Hartley. He had 2 sons from a previous marriage, twin boys named Connor and Kyle, who were 11 when they moved in, and who occupied the center of every room they entered the way certain people just do, like gravity around them, is slightly stronger. Gerald was not a cruel man. He was something more ordinary and harder to argue with. He was a man who saw his own children first, always, and saw everyone else through whatever light was left over. My mother, for her part, reorganized herself around Gerald the way I've since watched other women do, around men who offer stability after chaos. She became his, not in a way that was obvious or dramatic, just in 1,000 small adjustments. Which restaurants we went to, which holidays mattered, whose achievements got the long dinner conversation, and whose got a nod. Connor and Kyle were good at hockey. Gerald coached. My mother went to every game. I ran cross-country and won regionals at 16, and my mother texted me from the rink, proud of, home late, leftovers in fridge. I don't say this to make her sound like a villain. I say it because you need to understand the architecture of the family I came from. The weight distribution, the load-bearing walls, so that what happened later makes sense. I got into Simon Fraser University on partial scholarship. Computing science. I needed about $9,200 a year to cover what the scholarship didn't. I was 17. I sat down with my mother and Gerald at the kitchen table in March, with my acceptance letter printed out and a breakdown of costs I'd made myself in a spreadsheet. Because that is the kind of child I was. Organized, quiet, hopeful in a way I hadn't yet learned was dangerous. Gerald looked at the numbers. He looked at my mother. He said something about the economy, about tuition being a lot for any family to carry, about how maybe I should look at student loans, maybe a gap year to save up, maybe a college program closer to home. I looked at my mother. She was looking at the table. What I didn't know then, what I would find out 4 years later from my aunt on my father's side, a woman named Patricia who sends me cards on my birthday and checks in like clockwork, was that 2 months before that conversation, Gerald had taken out a $60,000 line of credit to fund Connor's AAA hockey development program, private skating coaches, tournament travel across Western Canada, new gear, every season. The kind of investment you make when you believe in someone's future. I took out $18,000 in student loans and moved into a shared house in Burnaby with 3 other students. My room was barely large enough for a twin bed and a desk. The window looked directly into the neighbor's fence. I didn't call home much. Not because I was angry. I wasn't, not yet, not in any useful way. It was more that every call reminded me I was calling from the margins of something, from the edge of a family that had redistributed itself, while I wasn't looking. I worked. That's the thing I want you to understand. I didn't spiral. I didn't quit. I got a part-time job doing IT support for SFU's library system. I took on freelance web work through Kijiji ads and a student forum. I graduated in 4 years with $31,000 in debt, and a degree and a job offer from a mid-sized software company in downtown Vancouver called Norbridge Digital, junior developer, $58,000 a year, which felt like an enormous amount of money until I started paying rent in Vancouver. By 24, I was a mid-level developer. By 26, I was senior. I had paid off my student loans. I had a 1-bedroom apartment in East Van, a bike, a small TFSA that I fed like a garden. I lived carefully, not unhappily, carefully. There's a difference. My mother called occasionally. The calls went like this. She asked if I was seeing anyone. I said no. She mentioned what Connor or Kyle were up to. Connor was with a junior league in Red Deer. Kyle had started a landscaping business. And I listened and said the appropriate things, and we hung up, and I sat with the specific loneliness of someone whose family doesn't quite know who they are. When I was 27, I left Norbridge Digital and started contracting independently. I had a strong enough reputation by then. I knew the right people. I set up a numbered company, 147823BC Limited, which I later named Fenwick Solutions, and I ran it quietly. No website at first, no LinkedIn announcements. Just contracts, referrals, invoices, results. Why no public profile? I've thought about this. The honest answer is that I'd watched what happened in my family. When someone thought you had something worth taking, the energy that moved toward it, the credit that attached itself to other people. My father had built his practice quietly and carefully, and when he died, it dissolved. Partly because he'd never had the time to make it bigger than himself. Partly because grief doesn't wait for you to settle an estate. I wasn't going to make something visible until I knew it could survive being looked at. By 29, Fenwick Solutions was billing $380,000 a year. I had 4 contractors working under me, a retainer relationship with a property development firm in Quitlam, and a long-term contract with a healthcare software company in Victoria. I hired a business accountant named Sandra who had 30 years of experience and exactly 0 patience for disorder. She told me in our first meeting that I was undercharging and overthinking and that she'd fix both. She did. By 30, annual revenue had crossed $610,000. I had moved into a condo in Olympic Village with a view of False Creek. I owned a car that started every winter without complaint. I wore what I'd earned, took the trips I wanted, gave to causes I believed in. I didn't talk about any of it. Here's the part that still makes me pause. The year I turned 30, my stepbrother Kyle, the landscaping business, remember, landed a contract to maintain the grounds of a commercial property complex in Surrey. The property management company that administered those buildings had hired Fenwick Solutions the previous year to rebuild their client portal and automate their maintenance request system. Kyle had no idea. He just knew the company was well run, easy to communicate with, paid on time. He mentioned it to Gerald at Christmas. Said the tech company they were working with had completely transformed how they handled their contracts. Gerald apparently said, "That's what good business looks like, son. Finding the right partners." I found out from Patricia, who had been at that Christmas dinner. She texts me things she thinks I should know. She was also the one who called me on a Wednesday evening in October, the week before Gerald's retirement dinner, and said, "Audrey, I need to tell you something. Your mother has been telling people you've been struggling, that you left your job under difficult circumstances, that you had some kind of breakdown after that relationship with, what was his name, the architect? His name was Daniel. We had dated for 14 months and ended things respectfully, as adults, 18 months prior. My mother had apparently been using that relationship's end as shorthand for my instability ever since." I thanked Patricia. I told her I'd be fine. I went to that dinner because I still, despite everything accumulated, believed that families were capable of surprising you. Gerald had worked 40 years in insurance. He was retiring. It was a real milestone. And whatever I felt about how that household had operated when I was 17, I was not the kind of person who let old bitterness dictate my behavior. I put on a good dress. Dark green, simple. And I drove to the restaurant in Yaletown, and I sat at the table they'd put me at, which was technically at the dinner but pizin desensi kitchen, in the way that communicates something without saying it. My mother intercepted me near the coat check. She looked at me the way she sometimes did, this quick up and down assessment, like she was updating a file. "You look tired," she said. "You should try to sleep more." I told her I was well, I genuinely was. The dinner was fine. Gerald gave a speech. Connor gave a speech. Kyle gave a speech. Then my mother stood up. She had not been given the floor. She took it. That's important. She picked up her glass before anyone looked at her and started speaking. And by the time anyone might have said something, she was already going. She talked about Gerald, his dedication, his patience, his role as a father to 3 children. And I counted because I am my father's daughter and my father's daughter counts. She said 3. She included me, and something in me briefly lifted. Then she looked down the table at me. "Audrey has always done things her own way," she said. The room turned. No corporate ladder, no 5-year plan. She left a good job and she's been sort of freelancing, figuring things out. She smiled, the kind of smile that's designed to look fond. She's still finding herself at 31. She laughed a little. We love her for it. A few people laughed, the nervous kind. Gerald looked into his glass. I sat very still. I counted to 5, and then I stood up. I didn't have a microphone. I didn't need one. The room was not large and I have, when I need to, a voices. "I'd like to say sing," I said, "and I want you to know that my voice did not shake. Congratulations, Gerald. 40 years is a remarkable thing, and I mean that." I looked at him. He looked uncertain, and to everyone here, since my mother just described my work life, I'd like to be accurate. I turned to her. "Mom, the tech company that modernized Kyle's contract management system this year, The one Kyle has been talking about since spring. That's my company. Fenwick Solutions. I built it. I own it. We billed just over $600,000 last year. That's what the freelancing looks like. The room was very quiet. I didn't make a scene when I was 17, and you told me you couldn't help with tuition. I just took out loans and got on with it. I've been getting on with it ever since. I'm not saying that to embarrass anyone. I'm saying it because I'm 31 years old, and I'm tired of being described as a question mark when I am anything but. I picked up my clutch from the back of my chair. Enjoy the rest of the evening. I walked out through the restaurant, past the host stand, out onto the street. It was October in Vancouver, the air cold and wet, that particular smell of rain on concrete that I've always associated with the city deciding something. I sat in my car on Mainland Street for a long time. Not crying, just breathing, the slow, deliberate kind of breathing you do when something has finally been said that has been true for a long time. Let me stop here and step outside the story for a moment. If you have ever been the one in your family who is quietly doing the work, building the thing, paying the bills, while someone describes you as drifting, this is for you. If you have ever sat at the far end of the table not because you didn't belong, but because someone needed you to seem smaller, I see you. I want to ask you something, and I mean it genuinely. Have you ever had to tell the truth in a room where everyone had already agreed on a different version of you? Leave a comment. Tell me what happened. I read every single one. Now, here's what I didn't know walking out of that restaurant. What I didn't know was that the story wasn't finished. 3 days after the dinner, Patricia called again. Audrey, there's something I've been carrying for 8 years, and I don't think I can carry it anymore. She paused. Your father, before he died, he had set up a small trust. Nothing enormous. But he had been saving, separately from the household accounts, for years. He left you $28,000, designated specifically for your education or professional development. It was in his will. I went very still. She told me the rest. The estate had been partially administered by a lawyer in Edmonton. Some years after my father's death, when I was 19 and in my second year at SFU, and still making rent work by tutoring on weekends, my mother had contacted the estate lawyer. She had a letter my father had written, a private letter, not part of the legal will, that she presented as evidence of his intent to redirect the funds to family needs. The lawyer, who was old and not careful enough, had released the funds. They went into a joint account my mother held with Gerald. I called a lawyer in Vancouver the next morning. A woman named Carol, who had been recommended by Sandra, my accountant. She was precise and unhurried, and she did not flinch at anything I told her. It took 6 weeks. A formal letter to the original estate, records that had been kept more carefully than my mother had anticipated. The original will. In the end, we recovered $24,500. The principal plus partial interest, accounting for the years elapsed and administrative costs. The estate lawyer had not been malicious, just careless, and the documentation was sufficient to establish what had happened. I did not sue my mother. I did not call her. I didn't need to. I donated the full $24,500 to the Robert Cheng Memorial Bursary at the University of Alberta's Faculty of Science. A bursary I set up in my father's name, for first-generation Canadian students pursuing degrees in technology or accounting. The university sent me a letter. They told me the first recipient was a 20-year-old from Lethbridge, whose parents had immigrated from the Philippines. She was studying computer engineering. I kept that letter in my desk drawer. I still have it. 6 weeks after the dinner, Kyle called me. He'd found out about Fenwick. All of it. I don't know exactly who told him. Patricia probably, or Connor, who had apparently done some research of his own. Kyle was quiet on the phone for a long time, the kind of quiet that isn't empty, just full of something being processed. Then he said, Audrey, I didn't know about any of it. The tuition, your dad's money, I didn't know. I know you didn't. I should have paid more attention. I should have, I don't know, asked more questions. You were 11 when we all moved in together, I told him. You didn't know what questions to ask. We talked for almost 2 hours. It was the most honest conversation I had ever had with him. He cried at one point, briefly, the way men sometimes cry when they finally let something be real. Connor called me the following week. That call was shorter, harder, and also true. Gerald has not reached out. I didn't expect him to. My mother sent me a text 4 weeks after the dinner. It said, I hope you understand how embarrassing that was for everyone. I was only trying to be funny. You've always been so sensitive. I read it twice. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, out of accuracy. There was nothing to say that would land, and I've stopped spending energy trying to make things land that aren't going to. Through Kyle, I've heard she's been telling people I had planned the whole thing, that I staged it, that I've always had a flair for the dramatic. Maybe there's something to that. I have thought about whether I could have done it differently, said something privately, found a quieter moment. I've turned it over. Here's where I land. I had been quiet for 17 years. I had corrected that woman's story about me through silence and patience and achievement, and none of it had changed the story she was telling. There is a version of this where I pull her aside before the dinner and explain calmly who I am, what I've built. I have thought about that version, and then I remember that I had already been that version for 17 years. I had already built the thing and said nothing. I had already proved the point in every way that didn't require her to acknowledge it. Sometimes the truth needs a room. Today, Fenwick Solutions has 11 full-time employees and a new contract with a municipal government in the Lower Mainland. A digital infrastructure project that is the largest thing I've ever taken on, and that I am building the team to handle carefully and well. I have a therapist named Dr. Park who once said something I think about often. She said, "Grief for a parent who is still alive but has chosen absence, that's one of the loneliest things there is." She's right. I keep a photo on my desk. My father, Robert Cheng, 1991, standing in front of the strip mall where he would eventually open his accounting firm, squinting into the sun. He looks young. He was young. He had his whole plan in front of him. I think about what he would make of what I've built. I think he'd want to understand the financials first. That's who he was, and then he'd nod, in that steady way of his, and that would be enough. I'm not angry at my mother. I want to say that clearly. Not because it lets her off the hook, but because anger is a weight. And I put it down a long time ago. What I have instead is something cleaner. Clarity, about who I am, what I've built, what I will and will not absorb. About the people I keep close and the people I love from a distance that keeps both of us honest. Boundaries are not punishment. They're not coldness. They're the shape of a life you've decided to actually live. If you're watching this from a family that made you feel like a footnote, hear me. You are not what they said you were. You never were. You are the whole story, and you've been writing it all along. They just weren't in the room for most of it. Thank you for being here. If this found you at the right moment, please subscribe and leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your story. Or just tell me that you're still going. I read everything. And I'll see you next time.